I woke up gasping for air, the sound of his voice still echoing in my ears. Come to the airport. I'm arriving on the morning flight. It wasn't just a dream. It felt like a memory. Like Daniel had been right there beside me, his voice pressing against the walls of my bedroom, as real as the air I breathed. My hands trembled as I pulled the sheets tighter around my body, my skin damp with sweat. For a moment, I couldn't move. The clock on the nightstand blinked 4:42 a.m., and rain pattered softly against the window. The same soft drizzle that always seemed to arrive in late September, right around the anniversary. 5 years. 5 years and 3 days since his plane went down off the coast of Cape Cod. They never found his body, just twisted wreckage and scattered memories floating in the sea. I'd held on to that absence for years, like some cruel joke from the ocean. You'd think time would dull it. That grief would become something you could tuck into a drawer and forget about until the holidays. But some mornings, like this one, it rose up like a tide, flooding everything. I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, trying to breathe. The room looked the same, but something inside it had shifted. Or maybe it was just me. I hadn't heard his voice in years, and now here he was, demanding I come to the airport. Like no time had passed at all. I stood and crossed to the window, pressing my forehead to the glass. Below, the streetlights cast ghostly pools of yellow on the slick asphalt. Gloucester was still asleep, its fishing boats resting in the harbor, its streets hushed beneath the weight of a rainy morning. I whispered the words out loud. Morning flight. From Istanbul. The specificity of it made me shiver. Dreams weren't supposed to be that clear. They were supposed to dissolve by sunrise, fade like fog. But I remembered everything, his tone, his urgency, the way he always sounded when he was rushing out the door, still tucking his wings pin under the collar of his uniform, promising he'd be back by the weekend. Daniel Whitmore had a voice that didn't leave room for argument. I walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer. My fingers brushed against the edge of an old photo tucked beneath a stack of scarves. I pulled it out slowly. There we were, standing on the tarmac at Logan Airport, his arm around my shoulders, his pilot wings gleaming in the sun. It had been his first flight as captain. I'd been so proud, so sure the sky couldn't take him from me. I picked up my phone and, before I could talk myself out of it, dialed the flight information hotline. Boston Logan Airport, how may I help you? The woman's voice was groggy but polite. Yes, I need to check on a flight. Arriving this morning. From Istanbul. A pause. Then, flight 347. Arrival at 9:20 a.m. I didn't reply, just stared at the photo, my pulse thudding in my ears. Coincidence? Maybe, but the kind of coincidence that makes your whole body go cold. For hours. That's how long I had until the plane landed. For hours to decide whether I was about to do something wildly irrational, or whether, just maybe, the dead don't always stay dead. Daniel always said I had some weird connection to things, that I could sense when something wasn't right. He called it cat's intuition, back when he used to smile at me like I held the world in my hands. But I hadn't smiled in years. And if this was madness, then it was the kind I needed to see through to the end. I opened the closet and reached for the gray trench coat I hadn't worn since the day I saw him off at the terminal. The fabric still held a faint scent of my old perfume, sharp and floral, like someone I used to be. I slipped it on over my night clothes, tied the belt tight around my waist, and grabbed my purse. No makeup, no brushing my hair, no good reason, just a question I couldn't ignore. What if? The drive to Logan was a blur of gray asphalt, wiper blades, and silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't want music or voices or distractions. I wanted the storm outside to match the storm inside, and it did. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. Every flash of brake lights ahead of me like a pulse of doubt. Still, I kept driving. Traffic was light that early, just a few trucks and restless taxis weaving between lanes. As the city skyline began to rise ahead, I realized I hadn't even brushed my teeth. I was going to walk into an international airport looking like a ghost, which felt fitting, I suppose. I wasn't there to see the living. I was chasing the dead. By the time I parked and walked through the sliding glass doors into the arrivals hall, the rain had turned to a mist that clung to everything. My hair, my coat, the corners of my lashes. Logan buzzed with early travelers, tourists dragging sleepy children, students returning from abroad, business people glued to their phones. It was a blur of reunions and anticipation, and there I was, standing still in the middle of it all, holding my breath. I found the arrival screen. My heart jumped when I saw it. Flight 347 from Istanbul. On time. I had 30 minutes. I sat down on a bench across from the customs exit. Every few seconds, my eyes darted up. I watched people waiting with signs, with balloons, with flowers. An older couple stood hand in hand, their eyes lighting up when their grandchildren ran into their arms. A young woman fixed her lipstick 3 times, checking her reflection in her phone camera. A man with a cane clutched a single rose in a trembling hand. And me? I waited for a man the world had declared dead. Time slowed. 10 minutes. 7. 3. Then the announcement. Flight 347 has arrived. Passengers will be exiting gate C shortly. I stood up. My hands were ice. The first people to appear were flight attendants. Neatly pressed uniforms, tired smiles. Then came the stream of passengers. Families in matching shirts, solo travelers with earbuds, couples locked in sleepy conversation. I scanned every face, every pair of shoulders, every movement, and then I saw him. At first, it was just the way he walked, calm, slightly forward-leaning, like someone always bracing for turbulence. Then the shape of his jaw, his profile, the line of his brow. Daniel. He looked older, a bit thinner. A scar sliced through his hairline on the left side, something new. But it was him, my husband, the man I'd buried in my heart 5 years ago. And he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him. Blonde, tall, beautiful in a polished, magazine cover way. She laughed at something he said, tipping her head back carefree. Her hand held a bouquet of roses. His hand rested lightly on the small of her back. They were walking like a couple, like 2 people deeply, unapologetically in love. I couldn't breathe. The world around me faded to static, muffled, and slow. Then Daniel turned his head and our eyes met. In a second, the smile vanished from his face. Shock. Then something sharper, anger. He stepped forward, fast. "What the hell are you doing here?" he barked. People turned to look. That was the first thing he said to me in 5 years. Not "I missed you," not "you're alive," not even my name. Just rage. Lauren, her name would come later, looked between us in confusion, her hand still holding the flowers. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My voice was somewhere deep inside me, buried beneath disbelief. Daniel reached for my arm, then stopped himself. "Come with me," he muttered. "Now, we're not doing this here." And just like that, the man I'd mourned, the man I'd loved, walked away down the corridor, dragging me behind him like I was the one who owed him answers. We ended up at a cafe tucked into the corner of the arrivals terminal. One of those airport cafes that smelled more like disinfectant than coffee. It was nearly empty, just a few exhausted travelers nursing burnt lattes, a bored server wiping down menus. Daniel chose the booth farthest from the window, as if even natural light might expose something. Lauren slid in beside him. I sat across from them, my coat still damp, my hair clinging to my cheeks. My body was there, but my mind felt suspended somewhere between memory and madness. Daniel didn't look at me. Not really. The waitress approached, barely masking her disinterest. "Coffee?" she asked. Daniel nodded. 3. Silence followed, thick and unbearable. It was Lauren who finally broke it. She turned to me with a tentative smile. "I'm Lauren," she said softly. "You're Sarah, right?" I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. Daniel stared at the table like it held all the answers. Then, finally, he looked up. I suppose I owe you some kind of explanation. Some kind. He didn't sound sorry, just inconvenienced. I waited. I didn't die, he said plainly. Obviously. No, I whispered. Clearly. He exhaled slowly, like this conversation was exhausting him. My plane went down. You know that. But I survived. I was thrown clear during the crash. Knocked unconscious. I woke up on the shore hours later. Fishermen found me. Took me to a small clinic outside Izmir. Lauren blinked. You told me you were in a car accident. Daniel flinched, barely. I had a head injury. I didn't remember who I was for a while, he said. By the time my memory returned, I'd already been registered under a different name, Maxwell Curtis. The Turkish authorities thought I was another passenger whose body was never recovered. And you just went with it? I asked. My voice cracked, brittle and foreign in my own ears. He shrugged. It seemed easier, cleaner. No questions. No messy explanations. No wife, I said. No life back home. Sarah, no funeral to attend. Just vanish. Start fresh. I thought it was a sign, he snapped. A second chance. You don't know what it was like, waking up nameless, alone. The world thought I was dead. So I let it. Lauren turned to him, confusion spreading across her face. You told me she died in a car crash. Daniel didn't answer. Daniel, she pushed. I needed space, he said, waving it off. Closure. For everyone. I stared at him. This wasn't the man I married. That man had held my hand during storms. Had cried the day we learned we couldn't have children. That man had whispered promises into my neck, swearing we'd grow old by the sea. This man told his new wife I was dead, so he wouldn't have to deal with paperwork. Lauren looked stunned, hurt. So, we're not legally married. Daniel hesitated, then said the word like it was bitter in his mouth. Noah's silence fell so loud it felt like static in my ears. I finally spoke. Why are you here, Daniel? Why now? He rubbed his hands together, then placed them flat on the table. To settle things, he said. Legally. I want a divorce. I laughed, actually laughed. A sound I hadn't made in months. We're still married, I said. You never filed anything. You thought I was dead. And you thought pretending to be dead was more convenient than a phone call. His jaw tightened. I want to make this right, he said. No, you don't, I said, my voice low. You want something. That's not the same. He leaned back. Half the assets. What we built together. I'm entitled to it. You abandoned me, I whispered. You left me to grieve over an empty grave. Lauren reached out to touch his arm. He didn't move. She looked at me then, her eyes wide, glossed with shock. I didn't know. I swear. He told me you died. He even showed me a newspaper clipping, an obituary. I nodded slowly. I wrote that obituary. No one spoke. Behind us, a coffee machine hissed. My heart thudded painfully, slowly, like it had nowhere left to go. Daniel finally broke the silence. I just want to move on. Clean. Fair. Fair. There was nothing fair about any of this. I didn't remember driving home. Somehow, I ended up parked in front of my little gray cottage by the harbor, hands clenched around the steering wheel, engine ticking softly in the cold. The sky had turned a bruised blue, the kind of winter dusk that made everything look like a faded postcard. Inside, the fireplace still held embers from the morning. Milo meowed once before curling back on the rug. I sat on the couch, coat still on, boots damp from the airport floor, trying to breathe. Daniel Whitmore was alive. He had sat across from me, with that same slant to his mouth when he was hiding something. The same fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. The same man who used to hum softly while shaving, now casually asking for half of everything, like we were squabbling over leftovers. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there, hollowed out by the weight of it all. Later that night, I took out the box. It had been in the attic for years, sealed, taped, labeled with his name. I opened it slowly like it might still bleed. Inside, wedding photos, flight school certificates, postcards from Italy and Cape Cod. All the echoes of a life that was supposed to be ours. I held up our wedding photo and stared at the woman I used to be, eyes soft with hope, shoulders turned toward the man beside her. That woman buried a husband. She didn't deserve this ghost crawling out of the past, demanding his share. My phone buzzed. A new message. I've made an appointment with a lawyer. 11 a.m. Tuesday. You'll need to sign papers. Daniel. No, please. No, I'm sorry. Just cold logistics. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my old folder with legal documents, deed to the house, savings records, insurance statements. Everything I'd kept meticulous since his death. After the crash, Daniel's assets had been declared unrecoverable due to no body being found. But the house had remained in both our names. I had paid off the mortgage myself, brick by exhausting brick. I stared at the numbers, then opened my banking app. And that's when the panic began to rise. My main account was fine, but the second account, the savings I'd quietly built over the years from the sale of my father's old beach property, was empty, gone. $182,400 vanished. I blinked. No recent activity. No recorded transfers. But the account was linked to the joint name we used for the beach house sale. It had never been closed, just ignored. I'd left it untouched for years, meant for retirement, for quiet sunsets and someday comfort. Somehow he'd accessed it. Suddenly, the dots started connecting faster than I could breathe. The beach house had been sold in 2021. I'd signed off digitally through the lawyer, believing the funds were safely transferred into that old account. It was tucked under our shared names, but inactive. I hadn't touched it since. Never needed to. But someone had, and I knew who. Daniel must have used forged ID under his real name. Or maybe he convinced the bank he was back from the dead. Maybe Lauren had no idea what he was doing, or maybe she did. My hands were shaking. He hadn't just come back for a divorce. He'd already taken what he wanted. This wasn't about closure. This was about theft. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling like it might collapse in on me. Then I stood, calmly, methodically. I went to my bookshelf and pulled down the slim black binder I'd kept for emergencies. Inside was the business card of the only person I trusted with situations like this. Eleanor Pratt, attorney at law. She'd handled my will when Daniel was declared dead, helped me transfer his car title. She knew the paperwork. She knew me, and now she'd know everything. I dialed her number. She picked up after 2 rings. Sarah. Her voice was warm, familiar. I need to see you, I said. There was a pause. I figured. Daniel showed up here 2 hours ago, with a proposal. My stomach dropped. Then you already know. I know enough, Eleanor said. Come in tomorrow morning. Early. I hung up. Then finally, I cried. Not because he was alive, but because everything I'd carefully rebuilt was already being dismantled. The next morning, Gloucester was wrapped in thick fog. I drove toward Eleanor's office with the headlights on, barely seeing 10 feet ahead. It felt appropriate somehow, like even the town was refusing to reveal what lay ahead. Eleanor Pratt's office sat in an old colonial house, white shutters and a brass doorknob that never quite stopped squeaking. She met me at the door herself, wearing a navy turtleneck and those rectangular glasses she always pushed up her nose when annoyed. This morning, they were halfway down. She didn't offer small talk, just a quiet come in. We sat in her office, where everything still smelled like cedar and ink. She placed a thick manila folder between us. Daniel came by yesterday, she said, fingers laced. Claimed he'd been in a witness protection program, that the government faked his death for his safety. Said now that he's back, he wants to reclaim his legal identity, finalize the divorce, and split the assets. I blinked slowly. He's lying, I said. Eleanor nodded. Of course he is. But lies backed by partial truth can get messy. I took a breath. He stole money from the joint account tied to the beach house sale. Over $180,000. He accessed it before reappearing. I didn't even know it was still linked. Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply reached for a notepad. Do you have documentation? Yes. I brought everything. I handed over my USB stick and a printed spreadsheet I had pulled together overnight. Also this. From my purse, I produced a letter. The only real letter I'd ever received from Daniel during our marriage. Dated 5 years before his death. His signature was unique, an elaborate D, with a cross-stroke that curled like a wave. I laid it beside the notarized beach house sale document he must have signed as Daniel Whitmore. Eleanor stared at them both. After a moment, she said, "That's not the same signature." No, I agreed. He forged it, or someone did it for him. Either way, he impersonated a dead man himself. The irony made me want to laugh, but I didn't. I just sat there as Eleanor's legal brain began to spin. This gives us leverage, she said. If he fraudulently accessed funds using a forged signature, that's financial impersonation. Depending on the state, that can be a felony, especially if we can prove he was never in witness protection. He wasn't, I whispered. There were no officials, no documents, no protocols. He just showed up. Eleanor leaned back. Then we treat this like what it is. Fraud, identity theft, and financial abuse. She paused. But Sarah, we also need to prepare for the court of public opinion. What do you mean? If he's resurfacing with a new wife, you can bet he'll try to paint a narrative. That he was hidden for national security. That he regrets leaving you but had no choice. That he came back to make things right. We've seen it before. People fall for stories more than facts. I swallowed. So we need a story too, I said. Eleanor smiled faintly. Not a story. The truth, but packaged well. She handed me a stack of papers. We'll file an injunction on the contested assets. Freeze that account and request a financial audit. In the meantime, I want you to write a statement. Everything. From the day he died until the day he came back. I stared at the paper. I already have, I said quietly. Eleanor tilted her head. You did. I nodded. It's not legal language. Not facts and figures. Just my truth. And it was true. That night, after the call, I had stayed up until dawn, typing, pouring every wound into sentences, every memory into pages, not for anyone else but for me. Because for 5 years, I had lived with a ghost. Now, the ghost had a name, a bank account, and a wife. But I still had the truth. 2 days later, I saw her, Lauren Mitchell. It happened at the small grocery store off Main Street, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and the cashier still asks how your mom's doing. I had stopped in for coffee beans and almond milk. She was already in line, her long auburn hair tucked into a green wool coat, a tote bag slung over her arm. She turned her head when I stepped in, and for a second, our eyes met. I didn't expect recognition, but it was there, that fleeting flicker of guilt. She looked away first. I should have left it at that. Should have picked a different line, a different store, a different day. But I didn't. As she stepped outside with her bag, I followed. "Lauren," I said softly. She froze, turned around slowly. "Yes." She didn't pretend not to know me. That told me everything. "I'm Sarah Whitmore," I said. She gave a tight nod. "I know." The silence between us was so still it made the passing traffic sound like waves crashing. Lauren's breath clouded in the cold air, and her fingers clutched her tote like it might anchor her to something real. "I didn't know at first," she said quietly, "who you were, what he'd done. But you know now." She nodded. "How long?" I asked. "We met 4 years ago in D.C. I had just transferred to the Federal Archives. He introduced himself as David Holloway. I blinked. He changed his first name. She gave a bitter laugh. He said Daniel sounded too dramatic, too connected to a life he'd left behind. He never told you he was married? No. He told me his wife had died in a fire. Said he lost everything. That's how he justified the nightmares, the paranoia. I thought he was a war vet. My stomach turned. So you married him? 2 years ago, she said. A courthouse wedding. No guests. Just us and a witness from the DMV. I wanted to ask more. About their house. About the life he had spun from lies. But none of it would matter. Not now. He's not who you think he is, I said. Lauren looked at me and her eyes softened. I know. And that's when I realized something else. She wasn't the villain. She was just another casualty. A different kind of widow. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For not seeing it sooner. We stood there on the sidewalk for what felt like hours, but it was only moments. A gust of wind swept between us, cold and sharp. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He left this in his drawer. I don't know what it means, but I thought maybe you should have it. I took the envelope without opening it. Are you going back to him? I asked. Lauren looked away. I haven't decided, she said. And then she walked away. I stood there, envelope in hand, heart thudding in that strange rhythm between anger and pity. I had thought confronting the other woman would bring closure, maybe even satisfaction. Instead, it brought something else. Clarity. Daniel wasn't just a liar. He was a master of reinvention, always rewriting himself to fit someone else's need. And we were both just chapters he had tried to erase. But I wasn't going to let him finish the story. Not this time. I waited until I was home to open the envelope. The paper inside was old, creased, yellowed at the edges, the ink slightly faded. It wasn't a letter. It was a photocopy of a death certificate. His own. Daniel Everett Whitmore. Deceased. May 17th, 2019. Cause of death. Plane crash, North Atlantic route. Filed in D.C., signed by a federal investigator and notarized. It was official. My hands shook. He had forged his own death. I stared at the paper, reading it over and over as if some hidden message might reveal itself. But the facts remained unchanged. Daniel had somehow manipulated the system, faked a tragedy, and vanished like a ghost to the new name and a new life. My mind reeled. Why? What could have driven him to erase everything? Then I remembered something Lauren had said, that he told her his wife had died in a fire. So he hadn't just erased himself. He had rewritten me too. Made me disappear. My first instinct was rage. The kind that clogs your throat and burns behind your eyes. But as the anger simmered, it gave way to something sharper. Something colder. I needed answers. And if I had learned anything in the last 5 years, it was that answers hide in the details. I called Eleanor Pratt, the attorney who had handled my wrongful death benefits case. She was retired now, living up near Bar Harbor, but she picked up on the second ring. Sarah, she said, her voice warm. It's been a while. I need your help, I said, and I told her everything, from the voice in my dream to the face at the airport to the paper I now held in my hand. There was a long pause. You're saying Daniel is alive? Yes, and remarried, living under the name David Holloway. Another pause. Then we may have a legal problem. A big one. I don't care about the benefits, I said. I don't even care about the marriage. I just want to know how he did it. Who helped him? Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said, Come to Boston. Tomorrow. Bring the document. I'll make some calls. The next morning, I drove through coastal fog to her office, tucked into an old brownstone near Beacon Hill. Eleanor hadn't changed much. Gray hair pulled into a tight bun, tweed jacket, eyes like steel under reading glasses. She took one look at the death certificate and shook her head. This is high-level forgery, she said. Not the work of someone with a fake printer and a wild imagination. He had help. Someone in the system. She ran her fingers along the notary seal. And if this is real, and I mean legally filed real, then it passed through at least 3 layers of federal verification. Which means he didn't just disappear, Sarah. He was protected. My mouth went dry. Protected? By whom? That word cracked open a door I wasn't ready for. Maybe Daniel wasn't just a coward. Maybe he had been running from something or someone. And maybe I was now standing in the crosshairs of whatever he left behind. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her notepad. There's something else, she said. His life insurance claim was paid out, but not to you. I blinked. What? The payout went to a trust, one that was dissolved 6 months ago. The account was linked to a private bank in Zurich. My stomach turned. Do you think he used that money to start over? Eleanor nodded grimly. I think he funded his resurrection. I didn't storm into their house. I waited. Eleanor helped me draft a letter. Not a legal threat. Just the truth, carefully laid out. I sent it certified, return receipt requested, addressed to both David Holloway and Lauren Mitchell. Then I waited again. It took 5 days. 5 long days of sleepless nights and second-guessing everything I'd ever believed about the man I once loved. Then, late one afternoon, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. He stepped out slowly alone. No Lauren, no bodyguards, just Daniel or David, whatever name he was using now. But to me, he was just the man who left me to burn in the wreckage of a life he had torched. He looked older, more gray around the temples, lines around his eyes, but his posture was the same. Controlled, measured, calculated. Sarah, he said. I didn't answer. He sat across from me on the porch. For a moment, he just stared at his hands like they were strangers. Then he said it. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed. It was bitter and cold and hollow. You faked your own death, Daniel. You let me mourn you. You let me bury an empty box. He looked away. I had no choice, he said. There's always a choice. He paused. Then, barely audible, he said, there was a threat. From something tied to my past missions. I was told the only way to protect you was to disappear. I blinked. Told? By whom? He didn't answer. Was the trust part of that too? The bank in Zurich? The new identity? The marriage to Lauren? My voice rose. He finally looked up. That wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to love again. Then you shouldn't have rewritten me like I was a chapter you could erase. He didn't deny it. Didn't apologize. He just sat there, breathing heavily. I tried to check on you, he said. From a distance. I scoffed. You mean the flowers? The envelope? You watched me spiral into homelessness and grief and thought lilies would fix it. Silence. I don't need your excuses, I said. I need your signature. He flinched. I'm filing a petition to have your death certificate voided, to restore my legal identity, to expose everything you buried under your lies. I don't care if you run again. I just want the truth documented. And if I refuse... I stood. Then I'll go public. I'll send the documents to the press, to the FAA, to the Department of Justice. You'll be a ghost hunted by everyone you tried to avoid. He closed his eyes. You wouldn't. I already have. I handed him a folder. Inside, copies of the certificate, Eleanor's findings, and a notarized letter stating my intent. He read it in silence. Then, with a quiet sigh, he pulled a pen from his coat. I'll sign it. But Sarah, I froze. I never stopped loving you. I didn't flinch. Didn't soften. I had cried enough tears for this man to fill the bay outside my window. You didn't love me, I said. You loved the version of me that didn't get in your way. As he stood and walked back to the SUV, I felt no satisfaction, no victory, just closure. And sometimes that's the bravest kind of ending. The voided death certificate arrived in the mail on a Thursday afternoon. I held it in my hands like it was some ancient artifact pulled from a shipwreck. It smelled of ink and bureaucracy, but to me it was the most sacred piece of paper I'd received in years. Not because of what it undid, but because of what it allowed me to do next. I changed my name back, legally, officially, proudly. Sarah Whitmore. I reclaimed every syllable, like a breath I'd been holding for too long. The bank account that had been frozen under a false widow status was finally released. Not much was left, but it was enough. Enough to move, to rebuild, to choose. I didn't stay in Gloucester. There were too many ghosts in that town, some mine, some borrowed. Instead, I packed 2 duffel bags, sold the remaining furniture, and drove south along the coast. I didn't have a map or a plan, just a direction. It was somewhere near Narragansett Bay that I pulled over on a foggy morning and watched the waves break over the rocks. There was a small cottage for rent just off the beach. White shutters, uneven floorboards, and a porch that creaked like it whispered stories at night. I signed the lease the same day, and that was where my second life began. I planted lavender by the windowsill, adopted a cat with crooked ears and a bad attitude. I started painting again, not well, but with intention. I joined a writing group at the local library where no one knew my story and no one needed to. They only knew the words I put on paper. I didn't tell them I had once been married to a man who died and came back a stranger. I didn't tell them I used to dream in coded memories and wake up crying in an empty bed. Instead, I told them I liked the sea and silence, and that I was learning how to make sourdough bread, though I kept killing the starter. And one day that was enough. Sometimes people ask me, if I had the chance to go back, would I do anything differently? I used to think I would, that I'd stop the wedding, that I'd read the signs, that I'd never fall for a man who could vanish so completely. But now I know the truth. Every broken part of that story led me here, to this tiny house with sea glass in the windows and freedom in the air, to a life no longer built on someone else's lies, but on my own strength. I don't wait for the mail anymore. I don't fear the sound of someone knocking. And if I ever see him again, on a street, in a store, in someone's memory, I'll nod politely and keep walking. Because I'm no longer the woman who needed answers. I'm the woman who created her own.